The year was 1967. While the outside world was experiencing the psychedelic craze of the Summer of Love in a parallel universe, the acoustic church of bluegrass music maintained its uncompromising purity. It was a closed religion with saints and rules as rigid as stone. And in December of that year, two of the church's most beloved sons, Bobby and Sonny Osborne, committed blasphemy. They released Rocky Top, an irresistibly fun hit, but for conservatives it was an act of betrayal. It had drums, electric bass, and was plugged in. They had brought the sounds of the outside world into the sanctuary. The Osborne Brothers tragedy is not a familiar Nashville tale of failure. Theirs is more complex. It is the tragedy of innovators abandoned by the people they loved most. They were loyal sons who committed the greatest crime of all. They changed the rules. By creating a global hit, they became superstars to the world, but heretics and sellouts to their own spiritual homeland. This is a story about the cost of pioneering and the loneliness of being expelled from the only church you've ever known. The whole reason why the Osborne brothers became rebels and why their rebellion hurt so deeply lies at the root of their story. Their origins are not just part of the story. They are the whole tragedy. They were born, Bobby in 1931, Sonny in 1937 in Leslie County, Kentucky. And they grew up near Hyden and Thousand Sticks. If you want to understand Appalachia, this is the epicenter. This is not the romantic version of rolling green hills. This is coal country. In the 1930s and 1940s, this was one of the poorest, most isolated places in North America. The hollers here were deep and narrow, and the steep mountains blocked out the sun. Roads, when they existed, were virtually impassable. Many families, including the Osbornes, lived in small wooden houses, often without electricity or running water. This is a world defined by two things: coal and isolation. The economy is king coal. It's a brutal cycle of boom and bust. Coal companies own everything: company stores, housing, politicians. When coal is booming, there are jobs, dangerous, back-breaking jobs in the shadows. When coal is busting, there's nothing, absolutely nothing. This isolation created a unique culture, a culture of self-sufficiency, family first, and extreme wariness of outsiders. And in that isolation, music was not a luxury. It was a necessity. It was news, entertainment, church, and history all rolled into one. Their father, Robert Osborne, was a key figure in their story. In a land of miners, he was an educated man. He was a school teacher, but he was also a fiddle and banjo player, playing the old-time style that had been passed down through the generations. Their little house was always filled with music. This is music before when there is bluegrass. It is the sound of old Anglo-Irish ballads, preserved in these mountains like amber. It is fiddle songs for dancing, sad hymns. Bobby and Sonny grew up in this environment. They breathed this music. It was their heritage. They learned that music was something serious, something real, something that belonged in your family. And they also learned something else. They wanted out. The poverty of Leslie County was not romantic. It was real. The Osborne Brothers drive, the drive that would later be called commercial, was not driven by greed. It was driven by the vivid memory of having nothing. They never wanted to return to that life. They were looking for a way out, and music was the only way they knew. They just need a vehicle. And then, one fateful night, a radio signal penetrated those mountains and brought them their answer. While Bobby and Sonny were growing up in Kentucky, a revolution was quietly taking place in Nashville. A single man, a great musical dictator, was inventing a new genre of music. His name is Bill Monroe. Monroe was also a son of Kentucky, but he was a different kind of man. He was intense, brooding, and possessed a cold, steely ambition. He played the mandolin, but he didn't play it like a gentle folk instrument. He played it like a weapon. He took the old-time music he grew up on and combined it with two completely unfamiliar ingredients. First of all, blues. Monroe learned from a local African-American guitarist named Arnold Schultz. Schultz taught him about blues notes, about syncopation, about soul. The second is speed. Monroe took the leisurely rhythm of old music and injected it with adrenaline. He wanted it to be hot. He wanted it to have a relentless drive, a pounding rhythm he called his time. He formed a band, the Bluegrass Boys, and over the years, he experimented adding a fiddle, a bass, but there was still a missing piece. That piece of the puzzle came on December 8th, 1945. It was the night of the Grand Ole Opry at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. Bill Monroe took the stage with a shy 21-year-old banjo player from North Carolina. His name was Earl Scruggs. Audiences had heard the banjo before, but mostly in the clawhammer or two-finger style. It had a rustic, almost plunky sound. But Scruggs didn't play like that. He perfected a complex three-finger roll style that originated in his homeland. It wasn't plunky, it was like a machine gun. It was a continuous, precise, sparkling cascade of notes driven by a driving rhythm. The band began to play. Monroe chopped her mandolin like a snare. Lester Flatt, the guitarist, sang lead. And then Scruggs played his solo. A stunned silence fell over Ryman. And then the audience exploded. They screamed. They stamped their feet. They had never heard anything like it. It had the solemnity of old music, but the speed and danger of an oncoming train. They screamed for an encore, and an encore, and an encore. Monroe's act killed the show. It was at that time that bluegrass, as a distinct musical genre, was born. The radio signal from that night, from WSM 650 AM, traveled hundreds of miles. It crossed the mountains and landed at the small house in Hyden, Kentucky. It found an 8-year-old boy named Sonny Osborne. As Sonny later described it, it wasn't just music. It was a revelation. He heard his future through that crackling radio. He became an instant believer. Both Sonny and Bobby were caught up in the whirlwind. They started learning. They started practicing. They weren't just fans. They were apprentices from afar. And as this new musical genre took shape in the late 40s and early 50s, it became more than just a style. It became a doctrine, a religion, and Bill Monroe was its infallible pope. If you want to play bluegrass, you have to follow the rules. Any deviation is not innovation, it is blasphemy. The doctrine is built on a set of 3 pure, unbreakable rules. The most sacred vow is the acoustic. Bluegrass is the sound of woodwinds and strings. Anything plugged in, electric guitar, electric bass, steel, is considered an insult. It is the sound of the outside world, of honky-tonks, of rock and roll, of fake Nashville. To plug in is to desecrate the temple. That purity extended to rhythm too. Bluegrass music was not allowed to have drums. Drums were considered a vulgar, noisy crutch, the sound of dance music and sin. The real rhythm had to come from within the band. From Monroe's mandolin chops on beats 2 and 4, the acoustic bass thumping on beats 1 and 3, and the pounding banjo rolls. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, there is the sacred harmonic structure. It's the famous high lonesome sound, and it has a precise formula. The lead sings the melody in the middle register, the tenor soars above it, and the baritone fills in the chords below. To change that haunting stack structure is to change the very DNA of music. This is the church that Bobby and Sonny Osborne joined. They didn't just admire it from afar, they became a part of it. They were the children of the church, the anointed ones. Their early career was a perfect apprenticeship in orthodoxy. Bobby, the older brother, with his crystal clear voice, began his career with a solid traditional bluegrass band, the Lonesome Pine Fiddlers. He is an accomplished tenor, but Sonny the Prodigy was the one who really went inside. In 1952, when Sonny Osborne was just 14 years old, still a schoolboy, a crisis occurred. Earl Scruggs, the saint of the banjo, temporarily left Lester Flatt's wildly popular band. Flatt and Scruggs needed a replacement, and the only person on the planet who sounded like Earl enough to fill the void was a 14-year-old kid from Kentucky. They hired him. Sonny Osborne, still in school, was joining the second largest bluegrass band in the world. And soon, an even bigger call came. The Pope himself, Bill Monroe. Monroe heard about this young prodigy and hired Sonny, then a teenager, as the official banjo player for the Bluegrass Boys. Stop and understand what this means. Sonny Osborne, at an age when most boys are worrying about acne, held two of the most prestigious positions in the bluegrass universe. He played in the band Flatt and Scruggs and Bill Monroe. He didn't just read the Bible, he lived with the people who wrote it. He knows all the rules. He knows all the doctrines. He understands purity. He is a perfect product of the system. And that's why when he started breaking those rules, it wasn't an act of ignorance. It was an act of a high priest who decided that the church itself was wrong. Betrayal, when it comes, will come from within. The first rift didn't happen in Nashville. It happened across the Pacific. In 1951, tragedy struck Bobby Osborne. Like so many young American men at the time, he was drafted to fight in the Korean War. For a bluegrass musician, this might have been the end. But for Bobby, it was an epiphany. He was deployed to Korea, and in the brutality of the war, he was wounded and received a Purple Heart. But during the long months of being stationed, recovering, and moving, he did something he never did in Hayden, Kentucky. He listened to Armed Forces radio. And that radio station didn't play Bill Monroe. It played pop. It played big bands. It played smooth harmony groups like the Four Freshmen. Bobby, a natural tenor, was fascinated. He heard complex chord structures, jazz harmonies that didn't just stack on top of each other. He heard singers moving around the melody, creating tension and release in ways bluegrass had never dreamed of. He realized a fundamental truth. Harmony can be a painting, not just a blueprint. Meanwhile, back home, 15-year-old prodigy Sonny is fulfilling his past, playing banjo for Bill Monroe, while 20-year-old soldier Bobby is unwittingly absorbing his future. When Bobby returned from the war in 1953, he was a changed man. He was a war hero, had seen the world, and his ears were opened. The two brothers were ready to unite. But it wasn't just the two of them. They joined forces with one of the most fiery, greatest, and controversial figures in bluegrass history, Jimmy Martin. Jimmy Martin is a force of nature. He calls himself the king of bluegrass. He's a powerful, fierce vocalist, an uncompromising traditionalist. He embodies the high, lonesome sound. They formed a trio, Bobby on vocals, Sonny on banjo, and Jimmy Martin on vocals and guitar. In theory, it was a dream band, but immediately they stumbled upon Monroe's third commandment. Here's the thing. According to the Monroe Doctrine, Jimmy Martin, with his powerful lead vocals, would sing lead. Bobby, with his soaring voice, will sing the part tenor above Jimmy. They tried, and it was a disaster. Jimmy Martin's voice was so high and powerful, let Bobby sing. Above, Bobby had to sing in a register that, as Sonny later described, sounded like a dog barking. It was shrill, unpleasant, and unbalanced. It wasn't lonesome, it was just loud. They were frustrated. They were in the car, driving to a gig, trying to figure out how to sing harmonies. They were three of the greatest bluegrass talents alive, and they couldn't sing together. And then one of them, maybe Sonny, the theorist, or Bobby, whose ears had been trained by pop music, came up with a crazy idea. What if they turned it upside down? What if lead not the middle note? What if melody to be highest note? They looked at Bobby. He was a tenor. They decided Bobby would no longer sing harmony. He would sing lead, but right in his soaring tenor range. This is crazy. The melody will be the highest voice, hanging above everything else. Jimmy, with his powerful voice, will sing the part tenor harmony under Bobby's melody. Right there, in that moving car, they shattered the foundation of bluegrass. They took Monroe's sacred structure, where the lead always resides in the middle register, sandwiched securely between a high tenor and a low baritone, and turned it upside down. In their new revolutionary system, the lead flew to the top. Tenor harmony lies in the middle, and baritone harmony lining at the bottom. They call it the high lead, or the harmony trio. They tried it right there in the car. It was like an explosion. The sound was incredible. It had a tension, a suspension that no one had ever heard before. Because the melody, the thing your ears latched onto, was the highest note. It created a feeling of excitement, almost anxiety. It was both beautiful and dangerous. This was their original sin. It was still completely acoustic, no drums, no electricity, but in theory, it was revolutionary. They took Bill Monroe's Bible and rewrote the most important chapter. They took this new sound into the RCA Victor studios. They recorded classics at like 2020 Vision and Chalk Up Another One. These recordings took the bluegrass world by storm. They were powerful, they were precise, and they were distinctive. How has the mainstream bluegrass world responded? They were confused. They were impressed by the technique, but offended by the blasphemy. It was not correct. Bill Monroe, it is said, was very unhappy. These were his children, his students, and they were telling the world there was another way. For a man who invented this art form, that was not innovation, it was disobedience. This legendary trio didn't last long. 3 such strong alpha personalities in one car was a recipe for fire. Jimmy Martin, the king of bluegrass, was not the man to play back harmony for anyone, no matter how great it sounded. They broke up, but the seed had been sown. The Osborne brothers had tasted innovation, and they had learned an important lesson. Breaking the rules can make great music. It's the mid-1950s. Bobby and Sonny officially form the Osborne Brothers. They had their formula: Bobby's unique high lead vocals, Sonny's machine gun banjo playing, and a tight professionalism. They are the best, most exciting, and most innovative bluegrass band on the planet, and they are starving. Reality set in. It was the dark ages of bluegrass. Rock and roll had taken over. Elvis was king. Country radio stations trying to compete were playing the smooth Nashville sound of Patsy Cline and Eddie Arnold. No one want to hear an acoustic band, no matter how good they are. Bobby and Sonny, who had escaped poverty in Leslie County, now found themselves poor again. But this time it was worse because they were on the road. They hit the Bluegrass Highway, a circuit of small, seedy bars and clubs in northern industrial cities like Detroit, Baltimore, and especially Dayton, Ohio. These cities were filled with Appalachian migrants who had come north to work in auto plants and who wanted to hear the sounds of home. It was a brutal life. They would drive 12 hours, sleep in their cars, just to play to a room of 50 drunk people for $20. Sonny Osborne told stories of being so poor that they had to decide whether to buy gas or buy food. They would play a gig, earn enough money to buy gas, drive to the next gig, and pray that they would get paid enough to buy dinner. They had families, they had children. The memory of poverty in Kentucky was not a romantic story. It was a ghost that haunted them, and the contrast was stark. They turned on the radio in the car, and what did they hear? The Everly Brothers, Don and Phil Everly. Two other brothers, also from Kentucky, also have roots in old-time music. They sing their own high lead harmonies, and they are the biggest pop superstars in the world. What's the difference? Their music has a beat. It's made for radio. Meanwhile, the Osborne Brothers, who could play music 10 times better than them, were starving because they were following the acoustic rules. Bitterness, or at least disappointment, began to creep in. Sonny, the restless theorist and innovator, has come to a harsh realization. Purity doesn't pay the bills. The church they worshipped in could not support its priests. They were at a crossroads. They could continue playing plain bluegrass music to 50 drunks and remain poor forever. They could give up entirely, go back to Kentucky, and perhaps go to work in the coal mines. Or they can change. They can take their unique sound and package it for the real world. They can break the rest of the commandments. They got a chance. They got a meeting at a major record label, MGM Records. They met one of the most powerful producers in Nashville, a man named Wesley Rose. Rose wasn't a bluegrass traditionalist. He was a businessman. He co-owned Acuff Rose Music, the publishing house that launched Hank Williams's career. He was the man who signed the Everly Brothers. He knew a hit when he heard it. The Osborne Brothers, in their acoustic bluegrass outfits, played for him. Wesley Rose listened. He was blown away by their technique, Bobby's voice, Sonny's guitar, and then he said the words that would change bluegrass history forever. He might have said something like, "Boys, that's the best music I've ever heard, but I can't sell it. No country radio station in the country will play this. It has no drums. It has no steel. It sounds like your grandfather's music. I can make you a star, but you have to meet me halfway. You have to be ready, plugged in. The choice has been made. Commit blasphemy or remain silent forever." For two men who remember poverty in Kentucky, that was hardly an option. The church doors were about to be kicked in, and so the church doors were kicked in. The year was 1967. Bobby and Sonny walked into the MGM studio, but this time, not just with their mandolin, banjo, and acoustic guitar. With them were the heretics, mercenaries carrying the weapons of the outside world. A drummer with a full kit and an electric bass player. They had a song ready. It was a rough draft, scribbled down by the genius husband and wife team Boudleaux and Felice Bryant, who had created the hits for the Everly Brothers. The song was called Rocky Top. It was not a deep bluegrass hymn. It was a fun, loud, almost silly tune about moonshine and fast living in Tennessee. In the hands of a traditional band, it would have been forgotten. But in the hands of the Osborne Brothers, backed by producer Wesley Rose, it became a hand grenade. The session started. Sonny hit a blistering opening banjo lick, and then it happened. The drums exploded. A hard, driving snare shot on the 2 and 4 beats. The electric bass vibrated, not just keeping time, but creating a groove that bluegrass had never known. Bobby launched his high lead vocal, but it was no longer lonesome and mournful. It was sharp, excited, flying on top of the new, powerful rhythm section. This was the sound of Appalachia plugged into a Marshall stack. It was bluegrass, and it was rock and roll. They finished the take. In the control room, Wesley Rose was probably smiling. He knew he had a hit. The single was released in December 1967. The immediate reaction was a seismic split. To the outside world, pop and country radio, it was a revelation. Rocky Top was a storm. It was fun, it was memorable, and it was impossibly catchy. It climbed the country charts. Pop stations deep in the summer of love played it as a fascinating novelty. In one afternoon, the Osborne Brothers had reached more people than the entire bluegrass world had in 20 years. But to their spiritual homeland, the bluegrass world, it wasn't a hit. It was an indictment. The silence from the bluegrass community was more terrifying than a boo. Old friends turned their backs. Bluegrass magazines refused to write about it. Bill Monroe, the patriarch, heard the drums and the electric bass, and to him it was the sound of betrayal. They hadn't just broken the commandments, they had burned the holy book. They plugged in, they used drums, and they did it on a song not about loss or salvation, but about corn liquor in a jar. In a single 3-minute recording session, the Osborne Brothers had achieved the commercial success they craved and simultaneously signed their own death warrant for permanent exile from their church. The 1970s were a time of paradox. Publicly, the Osborne Brothers were the embodiment of the American dream. They did what no boy in Hyden, Kentucky could ever dream of. They got out. They got rich. They got famous. And in 1973, they reached the absolute pinnacle of acceptance from the outside world. They were invited to perform at the White House for President Richard Nixon. Frame that picture. Two men who once had to decide between gas and food are now standing in the Blue Room. They are not there as exotic folk musicians. They are there as country stars, members of the Grand Ole Opry, ambassadors of Nashville. They were consummate professionals. They showed up on time. They wore impeccable suits. They weren't scruffy outlaw rebels like Waylon or Willie, who were starting their own revolution in Texas. The Osbornes were insiders. They were trustworthy. They were the Grand Ole Opry's greatest asset. Throughout the 70s and 80s, as other stars came and went, the Osborne Brothers were a constant. Night after night, they took to the Remand stage and later the new Opry House stage and delivered a flawless performance. But while the outside world applauded them, their spiritual homeland, the bluegrass world, was waging a brutal Cold War against them. This is the central tragedy of their lives. They have achieved everything they wanted, only to realize that it has cost them the only respect they truly craved. Their lives become a series of daily psychological collisions. On Saturday night, they will play Rocky Top at the Opry and receive a standing ovation from 4,000 tourists. On Sunday afternoon, they'll drive to a traditional bluegrass festival in rural Virginia. They'll step out onto the stage, and amid sparse applause, they'll hear it. Boos. Not loud boos, but deliberate, hateful boos from the purists in the front row, men in bibs with mandolins who considered the Osbornes Judas. Sonny Osborne, sensitive and a theorist, felt every boo like a knife wound. "We hurt a lot of people," he recalled, and no one expressed that vulnerability better than Bill Monroe himself. Monroe's punishment was not an angry confrontation. It was more subtle and far more brutal. It was psychological warfare that lasted for decades. Sonny recounted that for many years at the Grand Ole Opry, where they were both members, Bill Monroe would conduct a ritual. He would come and stand backstage during the Osborne Brothers' performance. He won't watch, he won't clap, he won't smile, he will just stand there. He would stand in the shadows, a tall, motionless figure with a cowboy hat on his head, and he would stare. It was the look of a deposed king. It was the look of a betrayed father. It was a silent weekly reminder. You have sinned. You have defiled my house. After the Osbornes finished and applause broke out, Monroe would quietly turn and disappear. He never said a word. Can you imagine that? Performing week after week, year after year, under the silent, judging gaze of your childhood hero, your mentor, the man you admired more than anyone else in the world. It gnawed at Sonny. It ate him from the inside. What made this rejection all the more painful was that Sonny knows what he's doing. He's not some dumb sellout. He's a thinker. He's an engineer. He's the chief theoretician of bluegrass. While the bluegrass world considered him a heretic, Sonny was quietly pushing the technical boundaries of the instrument in ways they couldn't even comprehend. He not only plays the banjo, he redesigns it. He was obsessed with tuners. Earl Scruggs pioneered cam tuners that allowed him to change the pitch of a string mid-song, but they were difficult to use and unreliable. Sonny worked with machinists to perfect them, creating the smooth, precise Scruggs Osborne tuners that every professional banjo player uses today. But that was just the beginning. He went further. He has invented out the 6-string banjo. He thought, why does the guitar have more range than the banjo? Why are we limited? He added a lower, thicker G string in addition to the normal high G string, allowing him to play harmonies and solos in the lower register that no other banjo player could do. Purists scoffed at it. That's not a banjo. But Sonny didn't do it to shock. He did it because he heard the possibilities. He was an analyst. His mind never stopped working. He explained to interviewers, I was listening to Merle Haggard records. I was like, why does his music have so much weight? Why does it knock you out? And I realized it's the rhythm. It's the drums and bass working together. We didn't have that. Our sound was fragile. His addition of the drums wasn't a cheap commercial move. It was a decision music consciously. He wanted bluegrass to have the same weight and power as its rivals. He is trying to rescue bluegrass from its own weakness. He is trying to give it the tools to fight in the modern world. And his reward for this innovation, contempt, they called him the overthinker. They said he ruined the feel. Sonny made the famous, tragic quote that summed up his entire career. We were simply 20 years ahead of our time. If we came along today doing exactly what we did, we would be hailed as geniuses. In the 60s, we were outlaws. He was absolutely right. And the burden of being 20 years ahead is an unbearable psychological burden. And then there's the song itself. Rocky Top is a miracle, and it's a curse. It was a miracle because it gave them financial freedom. It got them out of the dingy bars forever. It paid for their homes, their kids' college educations, but it was a curse because it became a prison. It wiped out everything else they ever did. Were they the ones who invented the high lead harmony? Number. They were the boys who sang Rocky Top. Are they the guys who recorded deep, heartbreaking country bluegrass ballads like Once More or Windy City? Number. They're the guys who sang Rocky Top. Are they the tightest, most technically skilled band on the road? Number. They're the guys who sing Rocky Top. The song they recorded in one afternoon, almost as a joke, became their tombstone while they were still alive. Surname Right play it every show, no exceptions. Usually twice, once in the middle, and again at the end. Radio stations wouldn't play anything else of theirs. They'd release a beautiful ballad and the DJs would call back and say, that's great. Can you send us a new version of Rocky Top? Fans would come up to them after shows and say, I love that song Rocky Top, but what was that fast grating thing you guys played in the middle? That fast, hard stuff is bluegrass. The irony is cruel. In trying to bring bluegrass to the masses, they created a pop monster that turned around and devoured bluegrass itself. They became a novelty band, a one-hit wonder in the public's mind, even as they were releasing a series of excellent, innovative albums. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, they continued to work. They were Opry workhorses. They recorded over 50 albums. They won countless awards, CMA awards, ACM awards, and every day Sonny Osborne wakes up fighting a two-front war. On one hand, he fought the country music world, trying to convince them that he was more than just Rocky Top. On the other hand, he fought with the bluegrass world, trying to convince them that he wasn't only his Rocky Top, he was stuck in the middle, on an island of his own making, proud of his success, but deeply hurt by rejection, confident in his innovations, but haunted by Bill Monroe's disappointed stare. It is an unbearable stress. It is a psychological pressure that no one can bear forever. The burden of building the bridge, being traversed on both sides, was beginning to show its cracks. Body and mind, especially Sonny's, could only take so much. The 40-year war was about to exact its final toll. The burden of building the bridge eventually became too much. The human body was not designed to endure 50 years of nonstop combat. And Sonny Osborne's mind, the brain that never rests, had been running at high intensity for far too long. The stress wasn't just mental, it was physical. It was 50 years of riding buses, 50 years of performing 5 nights a week, traveling from the Opry in Nashville to a festival in Colorado and back, 50 years of roadside meals, of sleeping, sitting up. And for Sonny, it was 50 years of bearing the weight of judgment. He was the spokesman, the defender of their new faith. He was the one who had to give interviews, who had to absorb Bill Monroe's stares, who had to listen to the boos. In the 1990s, his body began to betray him. First came the stroke. It was a warning shot. It affected him, but he fought through it. He learned to play again with a steely determination. But then other, more stealthy enemies began to attack. He was diagnosed with COPD, a disease that slowly robbed him of his breath. For a man who made his living on the road, it was a sentence. And then the cruelest thing of all happened. It was a neurological disorder. His hands, the fingers that had once been precision machines, the fingers that had invented new licks, the fingers that had redesigned the banjo, began to shake. Imagine that tragedy. Imagine that for a pianist, a surgeon, a painter, for Sonny Osborne, it was the end. His instrument, the weapon he had used to change the world, the tool he had used to fight the traditionalists, the tool that had fed his family, had now turned against him. He could no longer control it. For years he hid it. He fought it. There would be nights when his fingers would obey, and other nights when they would stiffen, refusing to perform the intricate roles that his mind could still hear perfectly. He was a perfectionist. For him, playing music just well enough was worse than not playing at all. Eventually, the burden became too great. The shame of not being the great Sonny Osborne, combined with the ravages of COPD, made it impossible for him to continue. 2005. After 53 years of professional activity, since he was a 14-year-old boy playing for Flat and Scruggs, Sonny Osborne, engine, theorist, innovator, announced his retirement. There was no argument. There was no bitter parting with Bobby. It was a physical surrender. It was a body broken by 50 years of war. The Osborne Brothers, one of the longest-running bands in American music history, have broken up. The engine is off. Sonny put away his banjo. And like Larry John Wilson, whom we've talked about, he went into a state of silence. He disappeared from public view, went home to fight doctors, and try to catch his breath. Bluegrass's greatest innovator was silenced by his own body. With Sonny's silence, the war he fought does not end. It simply passes into history. Now we can look back 50 years and conduct the trial that Bill Monroe quietly conducted from the backstage. The debate over the legacy of the Osborne Brothers is a debate about the very soul of bluegrass. And the prosecution, the purists, have a strong case. The prosecution argued that bluegrass is more than just a set of instruments. It's a feeling. It's a high, lonesome sound. It is the sound of hardship. It is the sound of mountains, of loss, of longing for heaven. The music of Bill Monroe of the Stanley Brothers has a biblical weight. It speaks of sin, salvation, and death. When you hear Ralph Stanley sing, "O Death," you are not just hearing a song, you are hearing the primal fear of existence. And what did the Osborne Brothers do? They took that sacred legacy and gave it to us. Rocky Top, a song about getting drunk on corn liquor in a jar, about a girl wild as a weasel. It's funny. It's infectious, and it's completely shallow. For purists, this is the unforgivable sin. They have taken the language of God and used it to tell bar jokes. They have traded profundity for popularity. They have eliminated pathos and kept only virtuosity. The purists weren't just cranky old men. They were defenders, and they saw a real danger. They argue that the Osbornes opened Pandora's door. They ask, if you add drums, what's stopping you from adding synthesizers? If you add electric bass, why not an electric guitar solo? If you play a song by the Everly Brothers, what's stopping you from playing a song by the Beatles or Black Sabbath? And the worst part is, the Osborne Brothers proved the purists right. By succeeding, they created a slippery slope. They showed that compromise pays off. They gave birth to a generation of monsters known as newgrass bands like Newgrass Revival, who took the Osbornes' license and ran with it, added long rock solos, Grateful Dead songs, and a hippie attitude. To a purist, the Osborne Brothers were not innovators. They were patient zero. They were the ones who introduced the commercial disease into the pure body of bluegrass, a disease that would eventually kill it. And finally, it's personal. This isn't some obscure band from California. This is Sonny Osborne. The boy sat at the feet of Bill Monroe. The boy learned from Earl Scruggs. He was an insider. He was a priest trained in the temple. His betrayal was not ignorance. It was conscious abandonment. It was like a son looking at his father and saying, "Your way is outdated. I can do better." For a patriarchal, honor-oriented world like bluegrass, this was a slap in the face. Bill Monroe didn't just lose a musician. He lost a son to the enemy. Glamorous Nashville. The case was clear. They were guilty of giving up their souls. But then the defense stood up, and their case was just as strong, built not on myth, but on fact. First and foremost, the defense attorney will point to Leslie County, Kentucky. They would say purity is a luxury that only those who have never been truly hungry can afford. Bobby and Sonny remember poverty. They remember having nothing. They didn't see music as some noble abstract art form. They saw it as their job. It was how they supported their family. Bill Monroe may talk about purity, but he was also a shrewd businessman who paid his musicians the bare minimum. When Wesley Rose said, "I can make you stars," or "you can go back to playing in bars," it wasn't an artistic choice. It was an economic choice. They didn't sell their souls. They simply decided their children deserved to eat. Next, the defense made a shocking argument. The Osborne Brothers did not destroy bluegrass. They saved it. Let's put things in perspective. It's 1963. Bluegrass is dead commercially. It's on its way to becoming museum folk music like the old-time songs their dads played. The radio stations have given up on it. The major labels have given up on it. The Osborne Brothers, with Once More and then Rocky Top, did the impossible. They brought the banjo back to country radio. They are a gateway drug. Thousands, maybe millions of young fans heard Rocky Top on pop radio. They liked it. They went out and bought the record. And on the B-side of that single, or on that album, they found a more traditional bluegrass song. They were hooked. They asked, "What is that banjo sound?" And it led them to Flatt and Scruggs. It led them back to Bill Monroe. The Osborne Brothers were not heretics. They were the greatest missionaries. They bridged the chasm between the old church and the modern world. They kept the genre alive long enough for a new generation to discover it. Finally, the defense called Sonny Osborne himself to the stand. They will ask, is an art form that does not evolve art, or is it an artifact in a museum? Sonny didn't add drums because he was lazy. He added them because his analytical mind, the mind of an engineer, knew that the sound needed weight. He didn't invent the 6-string banjo as a gimmick. He invented it because he, as an artist, heard notes that didn't exist yet, and he needed to figure out how to play them. They didn't just cover pop songs. They transformed them. They took songs by Boudleaux Bryant and Merle Haggard and turned them into bluegrass, proving that the genre was strong and flexible enough to accept new ideas. They didn't break the rules out of disrespect. They rewrote the rules because they, more than anyone, understood that the old rules were no longer enough. They respected Bill Monroe so much that they refused to let his legacy become obsolete. The verdict in this case was not handed down by a jury. It was handed down by the next generation. While Bill Monroe and the traditionalists were standing in the wings, staring, there was another group of people standing in the wings listening. Those are the kids. It was a mandolin boy from Kentucky named Sam Bush, a young guitar prodigy from California named Tony Rice, a banjo boy from New York named Bella Fleck, another Kentucky boy named Ricky Skaggs. These kids grew up listening to more than just Monroe. They listened to Monroe and the Osborne Brothers. They listened to the Stanley Brothers and the Beatles. They listened to Flatt and Scruggs and Bob Dylan. For them, the commandments are not rock solid. They are suggestions. And the Osborne Brothers gave them something even more precious than licks. They gave them permission to plug in, permission to add drums, permission to sing rock songs, permission to improvise and play long solos. Sam Bush, who founded the genre-defining band Newgrass Revival, said it most clearly. He said, without the Osborne Brothers, there would be no Newgrass Revival, period. Newgrass Revival took the model of the Osbornes, drums, electric, rock energy, and added influences of the Grateful Dead and jam bands. They became the rebel bluegrass band of the 70s and 80s. What did Ricky Skaggs, who had played with traditionalists like Ralph Stanley, do when he launched his solo career in the 1980s? He took the Osbornes' commercial model, blending virtuoso bluegrass with country hits, and became Nashville's biggest superstar. Who are Allison Krauss and Union Station, the most commercially successful bluegrass band of all time? They're the modern incarnation of the Osborne Brothers. They use drums, they use piano, they turn pop ballads into bluegrass masterpieces. It's the once more model, perfected. All of these artists, who are now considered the new saints of the genre, are walking the path that the Osborne Brothers had to shed blood to build. The Osborne Brothers were the missing link. They were the painful, maligned, but crucial bridge between Bill Monroe's austere past and the genre's explosive, experimental future. They accepted the arrows, the boos, and the silent stares, so the next generation could run across that bridge freely. And the final tragedy is that in 2005, just when the world had finally caught up and started hailing them as prophets, the main prophet, Sonny Osborne, was silenced. He had won the war, but it had cost him the ability to play music. The vindication, in fact, was long in coming. In 1994, nearly 30 years after they plugged in and added drums, the Osborne Brothers were inducted into the International Bluegrass Hall of Fame. The church had officially opened its doors, recognizing the heretics as saints. Purists who had once booed them now stood and applauded, and in the crowd stood Bill Monroe, the old pope who had lived long enough to see his outcast sons canonized. Their complicated legacy is encapsulated in the glorious irony of Rocky Top. The song of betrayal that got them banished has now become the genre's most beloved anthem. They triumphed so thoroughly that their greatest crime has become their greatest legacy. The tragedy of the Osborne Brothers is the price of being ahead of the times. They were the ones who endured the slings and silent stares so the next generation could run over the bridge they built. But their triumph was that they lived long enough to see the times catch up with them. They didn't destroy bluegrass. They forced it to evolve, proving that a tradition is only truly alive when it has the courage to change.